Extremists tend to be very small segments of a population, yet, like you said, they tend to dictate the vocabulary of what's going on. What is the best way to actually deal with these fundamentalists and extremists?
Yeah, there's two parts of the question. There are two illustrations of how to answer that. One is my own research, and the other one, of course, is the world we live in today with the Islamic extremists. But in terms of the cities I live in, I've researched, it's the true leadership, in my opinion, the genuine leadership is that holds to the middle in these. So you don't go for those easy, and it's so easy for leaders to use the ethnic card as a way to capture constituencies and hold on to them. But you are a leader in a genuine sense, and you express the commonality of all mankind and personkind, and don't go for those easy answers. And no matter what the extremists do, you hold fundamental to your own beliefs. Because in the long term, that's what everybody wants. Being fundamental to your own beliefs as a society, as a country, if it's your constitutional beliefs, hold firm to those no matter what. If you need to deal with extremists in certain ways, get rid of them, you might have to do that. You might have to do that, but don't sacrifice who you are as a country, as a people. If you do, they win. And it's easy for me to say that, right? But American leaders have felt incredibly threatened and, in my opinion, have not held to the basic tenets of this country. And 10 years from now, I think we're going to look back at this period and look at what a waste and what a cost we've felt over such a long, numerous years of American, I'm not going to call it leadership, American power. So I think many people, many Americans, if they would look back at September 11, 2001, and they look at the last 6 years, and if they could see what had happened, and if they could roll back the clock, I think they would want a different strategy, a different tactic, a different approach. And that's not being light on extremism at all. I mean, that's a whole other issue about how you deal with extremism.
How do you choose your countries to focus on? And currently, Darfur, Somalia, and some of the other African countries are in conflict and are destroying each other.
I'm an urbanist, so I study cities. And I'm fascinated with cities that contain 2 or more identifiable groups that really are separate from each other psychologically. So I was attracted to Jerusalem initially. Jerusalem is, in my opinion, the great puzzle of mankind. You know, some people say that God created Jerusalem because if we can find peace in Jerusalem, the whole world will be at peace. Because it's such a quagmire, it's such a puzzle about how to deal with Jerusalem. Belfast for the same reason. I get excited looking at extreme examples of division within cities. And then what do people that deal with day-to-day life, how do they cope with that? How do day-to-day policymakers deal with that? So that's what got me interested in that. Then issues of transition, political transition. So Johannesburg with apartheid was too good to pass up in 1995. And the same with Spain, a transition from Franco and a transition in the Basque Country, hopefully away from violence. And the transition in Bosnia being the transition away from war. So focus on urban and transitional uncertainty. So I'm intrigued by places, for instance, like Beirut. You know, the next logical place would be Beirut for me. Other African cities that are hosting competing groups and leading to very explosive urban situations would also be very, very relevant.
What are some, just in your studies, what are some of the first basic steps that a city can take to create that culture of peace?
A city leadership has to be cognizant and aware, let's say there's two groups in the city, that there are distinct group identity needs for, let's say there's a majority in control, minority that's been subordinated, that these identity needs for people, the people who feel part of this minority group are real, they're positive, they're productive, and that through the delivery of urban services, through the governance of an urban system, those identity needs and aspirations have to be accommodated. And that in these cities of division, you cannot impose an assimilative model on all citizens in the city. Because the assimilative model, where everyone will be treated the same, we're going to treat people as individuals, not members of their ethnic group, that's really easy for a majority to say that, right? So the majority in control has to think through a new lens of coexistent viability, that it's important for this minority group to feel viable, respected, productive members of that urban society, for the city and the society to blossom and to be healthy. Anything short of that, any messages that the minority feels where their identity is threatened or not respected is going to exacerbate the problem. It's not necessarily going to lead to violence, but it's certainly going to add to the social and psychological separation of those two groups in the city. And then we are in a situation where we're getting into a downward slope at that point. So I answered it generally, but there's a whole set of implications this has for how a majority city government would view a minority with respect, viability, and the group identity is a good thing.
What would you recommend for the average citizen of Los Angeles they could do to go towards a culture of peace?
Spend a day and walk the entire length of Wilshire Boulevard. Because you will see in Wilshire Boulevard the gradations, the socioeconomic, the ethnic gradations that this city is. And through that exposure, it will enlighten most of us that there are all sorts of different people here and all sorts of urban ecosystems and subsystems of incredible culture and incredible creativity. And maybe the next time I then look at the newspaper and it's talking about black violence in South Central, it'll be easier to detach from that and say that's the media. That's what they do. That's what they report on. And that you know there's a much more complex reality. Certainly problems, but that the reality out there is much richer, much more complex, and much more worthy of our attention as people, but also as city leaders. You know, it's one thing to say superficially and mouth, you know, multiculturalism and do multicultural festivals, but it's another thing to get out there and be exposed to it and feel that what multicultural richness is.
Do you think there was some kind of apathy from the world community in Rwanda, Tutsis versus Hutus? And if so, why? Because there was no intervention, no help for 100 days, 800,000 people, plus who knows. What are your thoughts about the whole Rwanda, Tutsi versus Hutu?
I'm going to sidestep that question in a way. I agree with you. I think there was not enough attention to the Rwanda debacle, massacre, but I'm not going to really sidestep your question because I'm going to apply it to another case. I think American and international lack of attention to what happened in Bosnia and Sarajevo for 4 years is a crime. This is still today a moderate Muslim population in Bosnia that was left out on its own for most of those 4 years.